Alright guys, to start exploring this concept, we're going to throw you right in the middle of this game situation. We're going to keep it fairly simple. The general thrust of this battle is that Tsung's team is built around cleaning up with Starmie, and Ojama's team has a Blissey standing in the way of that. So a lot of this is revolving around either trying to trap the Blissey with Dugtrio, or, since that's not the easiest thing in the world to do necessarily, generally to punish it with his physical Tyranitar. So, his Tyranitar comes in now, and Ojama sees it's coming in and double switches to Metagross. So, the Tyranitar is actually quite threatening in its own right. It's not just punishing Blissey, only to be met with 16 physical walls that never move. With Suicune down on Ojama's side, Salamence, it's Intimidate. It's at less than 70%. It's not switching in with Aplomb anymore. Metagross is at 73% and Paralyzed, and Claydol is at 11%, and that last Pokemon is not that likely to also be too good into T-Tar. Certainly hasn't made itself known yet. So what happens here is that without diving into was this truly the correct play or not, Tsung is going to go for an Earthquake against the Metagross, and it does look like the correct play because with his own Water type down, his Swampert gone, he does not really have a Metagross switch in. His offensive Starmie's at less than 70%. He's not going to want to subject that to more damage, especially because it just gets met with Blissey. That doesn't do anything. Dugtrio can't switch in, Regice can't switch in, Salamence can't switch in. So yeah, T-Tar can just go for an EQ, and hey, the Metagross is paralyzed and has to hit Meteor Mash. So, the odds are pretty good. Hey, T-Tar could even crit. And I want you to keep these concepts in mind of, taking into account all the odds that could go on at any given point in a battle. So the T-Tar goes for EQ. The Metagross does go for a Mash and hits. And both T-Tar and Metagross are now nearly out of commission. And this is really big because, yes, Tsung no longer had a switch into Metagross, so had to go for it. But the trade-off is, okay, well, now I can't switch into Blissey anymore. That's the problem. And again, it's all about that Blissey. If you can get rid of the Blissey, it's probably going to be okay. Broadly speaking, that's the biggest obstacle. And especially because the last Pokemon on Ojama's side could be, a number of things. So you need that T-Tar to switch into Blissey, and now that's gone. But you didn't really have anything else to switch into the Metagross. Ojama had the better position. And you can start number crunching about the EQ and Mash, and then you would have to start number crunching about all the other stuff that happened earlier in the game. So let's not go there yet. But just keep that general concept in mind. So now, Tsung double switches to Starmie as Ojama switches to Claydol. Nice move, beautiful move actually. Rather than guessing, should I Rock Slide the Metagross and no, either way, Ojama is actually again, I'm trying to stop myself from overanalyzing the game. Specifically, why didn't he just, attack again, get more lefties back on the T-Tar, which honestly might be a valid question, but really not the point. He double switches Starmie, which covers a Mence switch-in, covers a Claydol switch-in. Well, it kind of just gives Claydol more leftovers, but, whatever. It's drawing Blissey back in, and the whole point is that Tsung wants to draw Blissey in so he can do something about it with Dugtrio, with Regice. So, now the Claydol is going to escape to Blissey, and Tsung double switches again and goes to Regice. Now, this matchup, this one-on-one, Regice versus Blissey, is kind of a microcosm of the entire game, because Regice's whole thing is that it wants to blow up on Blissey. Blissey takes on its whole Stab, Ice Beam plus Thunderbolt coverage thing, doesn't care about T-Wave either. But if it gets blown up on, then, Starmie's going to run wild. We still don't know what that last Pokemon is, but it's going to run wild. And before, what made this particularly problematic was that Ojama did not have to counter Regice with Blissey. he had Metagross, which is one of the best switches to Regice in the game. And this Regice had T-Wave. It did not have HP Fire, so it could paralyze it, sure, but it couldn't actually threaten it with serious damage on the switch. Not that HP Fire is like serious damage, but you could theoretically wear Metagross down with HP Fires and then eventually threaten a boom on the Blissey. With T-Bolt, that's a much taller task. But now, thanks to that exchange we had between T-Tar and Metagross, we see that, okay, T-Tar can't switch into Blissey anymore, but also Metagross can't switch into Regice anymore. So, okay, well, now this game, opened up on both sides. Rather than, I'm going to switch to T-Tar to chase out the Blissey, it's like, well, now I can threaten this. That option might still be available to Tsung later, but by going to Regice here, he puts pressure on Ojama. He's like, all right, well, you either better be ready to risk this boom, or, I might just KO your Metagross for free on the switch, and what else are you going to switch into it? Claydol? Salamence? No, you're not. Those aren't taking an Ice Beam. I don't know what that last is, but, it better be able to switch in now, because I'm going for the Ice Beam now. Of course, it's not the easiest click in the game to make because, Regice is at 73%, Sand is active, so Seismic Toss is going to bring it below half, and then, since it is slower, it's under a lot of pressure, but, it's a tense game, so we gotta make tough moves, and Ojama does reveal that last now. And it is Jirachi, and with the same typing as Metagross, it is similarly an amazing switch to Regice. So, the whole thing about, Jirachi is that it also helps against Starmie, but it's also kind of a threat. But then again, Tsung is Dugtrio. The fact is, though, Mence at less than half, Starmie, not even at 70%, and T-Tar basically cooked. Is not just, basically Jirachi is acting as a second Blissey here, so kind of a problem. The difference is that unless this pulls out Sub-Calm Mind, in which case things might get really bad, but you can't really, Tsung's not really in a position to be careful about it, and it's also not the likeliest of things. Wish Calm Mind makes more sense on a team of Ojamas, which really likes the reinforcement of health passed to things like Suicune and the Choice Banded Salamence. So, yeah, the difference is that the Jirachi is slowed down by T-Wave a lot, so Tsung can do that. But here's where Ojama very beautifully goes to Claydol and on the T-Wave and gets it in safely. And, well, now the Regice is really... Here's the problem is that Claydol now threatens a boom, and no matter what Tsung sacrifices to the boom, it's not great. I mean, even something that doesn't look so useful like the less than half health Salamence. I mean, Salamence also is threatening, fairly, especially since the Jirachi is likely bulky and slow, and isn't going to take Fire Blast too well. And you land a Fire Blast on Jirachi with Salamence, well, suddenly it's in Starmie Hydro Pump range. So we're not going to get into the whole what do you switch in here, because again, it's not really the point. The point is that when you strip it down to it, Claydol is going to boom here almost surely, because no matter what, it gets a good target. Even if you take down the 14% T-Tar, well, now Blissey and Jirachi really don't have that much to worry about. So, and obviously the Dugtrio can still get there, but whatever it is, you can say, oh, well, maybe Ojama will EQ. Maybe he'll try to Psychic the Salamence switch. Whatever it is, he winds up booming, and he takes down the Regice with a useless crit. Now, Tsung goes to Starmie, and Ojama goes to Blissey. And this is the turn that we had to get to. This illustrates the whole thing. Nothing switches into Blissey here. I think Tsung went to Starmie to chase out Salamence, but whatever the reason he went to Starmie, he now is face-to-face with a Blissey, and he can't switch into it. He can't switch Dugtrio in, because then it definitely dies to... I mean, it might die to Ice Beam anyway, because this was an age where, Blissey bulk Dugtrio was not really a thing. Maybe you could throw some extra Spidef EVs on it if you felt, but, surviving Modest Max Blissey, hope it's bold-natured. And, yeah, so you definitely can't switch in, really eliminate any hope of that. And, T-Tar just switches in and dies, which, not great. Salamence, you come into Seismic Toss, you Brick Break, maybe it's an option. But the real best move as elected by Tsung was to stay in here and go for an Ice Beam and go for a freeze. Now, this is also not ideal because it's not like you have a million opportunities to go for this freeze and, I'll get one eventually in one of 16 Ice Beams. Yeah, this was the second Ice Beam used of the game. I'm not sure where the first one landed. It's not really important from my recollection and, skimming through the game when I opened it back up for this video. It did land on Blissey once before on turn 33, but it did not freeze. Anyway, I'm not sure. Actually, that would have been bad. So yes, game of odds, once again. Keep that in mind, that it can strike at any time. But of course, that also goes both ways. Yeah. So Starmie is a very narrow window in which to freeze here because it doesn't have a very high HP stat, not healing. It has rapid spin in the last slot, not recover. And Blissey's going to... Oh, actually, I didn't even realize. Actually, it has one turn to not freeze, or one turn to freeze, because I completely looked over. I was like, oh, Seismic Toss, but it's actually a Calm Mind Blissey on Ojama's side. So it had, and it's Ice Beam, meaning the last move is Thunderbolt, meaning that the Starmie dies if it doesn't freeze here, and that's almost certainly the game. And the freeze goes off. Now, we're not going to get into the rest of the game, but this yet. I mean, I will come back to and let the game play from start to finish once we get into something, into the main thrust of this video. But the point here is that what Tsung did is he played to his outs. Now, that term might be very obvious to you, or you might not be familiar with it because English isn't your first language, or you haven't been around competitive lingo. I don't know. Whatever it is, we're going to not just dissect what it is, but some of my thoughts about it. Intricacies, nuances, all that beautiful jazz. So, playing to your outs is basically, it is what it sounds like, but in case English isn't your first language, maybe you don't know what it sounds like. Maybe it's like, you leave? I don't know. It basically, your out is, any chance. You play to whatever possibility you have to win, including, low percentage luck. Which, at late stage of the game where one player has a dominant advantage over another, tends to be, well, this is my last option. Very few Pokemon games are 100% won. And so even if you need and of course, Hydro Miss on the next turn. But then what winds up happening is Tsung makes a beautiful double to Dugtrio and winds up trapping the Blissey. But that's the freeze and the free. Jesus Christ! The freeze sets it up, and now the Blissey is in Hydro range. Yeah, but Salamander, whatever. I'm sorry for focusing on the game, but the general idea is you play to whatever option you have. Low percentage stuff at the end of a game, right? That is playing to an out, and there is a great deal of skill in that. Of course, there is. To recognize how you can still win. I mean, this isn't necessarily just percentages. Of course not. It's just recognizing, oh, well, if I do this, I can, get chip damage on that Pokemon, and then, my sweeper can sweep if I get the boost, and, whatever. Playing to your outs does not necessarily just mean playing to whatever, luck thing. And, I mean, the kind of idea behind this video is that I think a lot of people have oversimplified playing to your outs as, oh, if I get a lot of luck, then I'll win, which is like, well, duh. Of course, I'm not saying that it doesn't take skill to recognize that a certain piece of luck can win. A lot of games look really bad, and then someone will say, oh, well, actually, if I get, 3 freezes in 4 turns, then I can actually still win, and a lot of people don't see that. So it is not just, black or white, good or bad, easy answer. That's the whole point. So, but I do want to mention that playing to your outs does also mean, double switching 16 times to get Stealth Rock damage so that you might be able to break through with a, decent damage roll, whatever it is. Sometimes playing to your outs means, playing so aggressively you provoke your opponent into choking. That happens more than you'd think. Like, I've had games where, whatever happened in the early game, and I was like, the only way, like, if my opponent just continues doing what they're doing, then you will lose. So what you have to do is basically pretend like there's something you can still do to win, and play it so aggressively that you rattle them, and they go, oh god, and then they slip up, and they might not even realize they've slipped up, and you're like, well, no way they're gonna give me this Pokemon for free, and then maybe they do, and they're like, oh my god, they did it. They didn't even realize they just messed up. They did the thing that they needed to lose when they couldn't lose otherwise. Psychological warfare, oh god, it's a whole thing. Blunder, a master of the form. But yeah. Anyway, so I've talked about the general ideas behind some of the stuff I'm going to go over in this video, but I wanted to tie it to playing to your outs in general. And for now, I would like, before we open back up the replay back up, I would like to draw your attention to this old post by my hero Earthworm. In it, this is during a discussion of freeze claws. When people were like, should we have freeze claws in GSC? And the answer to that ultimately wound up being yes. I have a video about it. But basically, he said, it takes skill to analyze the game to the point where you can create a situation for yourself in which you can win by getting a freeze or a critical hit, etc., and then executing that strategy. Now, this sounds very well duh in our so-called enlightened age, our enlightened age where everyone is a genius and then, plays like an idiot in important games. But that's every age, don't worry. So in our so-called enlightened age, we're like, well, duh, if you have to go for a T-Bolt crit to do it, obviously. But back in the less enlightened times or whatever, then players would often, look at playing for hacks as a sort of last resort. They would look at playing for hacks as like, oh, well, I got outskilled, so now I have to hope I get lucky. So a lot of the time, they would not really look at luck as an option. And now it has become more accepted. Like, yes, of course, there is so much luck in every single turn. Like, as stupid as it may sound, like every time you switch into, I don't know, an earthquake, it could have crit. It would have been stupid, but yes, it would have crit. Statistically, or the example my friend CL always used to give me, if you use 10 Draco Meteors across 2 Pokemon, I know it doesn't have 10 PP, if you use 10 Draco Meteors, should you hit every single one? Well, actually, I think the specific example they gave was, if you have 10 games where you have to hit a Draco Meteor to win, should you win all 10? Some of us might say yes, but percentage-wise, you shouldn't. I understand. And obviously that overlooks how much luck there is on every turn of the game. But basically, we eventually started moving into this era where luck is more accepted as a way of going for a win, because it does take skill to win with luck. Of course there is. I mean, the whole game is probability management, skill, etc., etc., etc. Now, where I respectfully diverge from my hero Earthworm is that I think that sometimes, with regards to playing to your outs, it can wind up being a way to give too much credit to something that's very sort of matter of fact. If you are in a bad game state, of course it does. Obviously, and this is why the whole subject is not cut and dry, very nuanced. There are game states where like you're in a bad spot. And, it does take skill to recognize that you have to, get a little lucky in order to win, whether that's a Rock Slide flinch from your arrow in advance, or if it's a Scald Burn in later gen, or something, lower percentage-wise. So the reason I picked this game between Tsung and Ojama was because it featured Tsung. And it's also an amazing game, which is why I'm letting it play out on the screen for those who are watching it. And for those who aren't, don't worry. I've linked it in the pinned comment so you can peruse it at your leisure. But it's an amazing game. It was for the World Cup of Pokemon 2016, Round 1, so both players taking it very seriously. It wasn't just like a friendly game where, they're messing around. Even those can, have honor kick in sometimes, pride. But, yeah, no, this had stakes. And both players were very invested. So the reason I picked Tsung is because I think I even mentioned this before. I used to call this phenomenon I'm about to tell you about, the Tsung effect, and this was nothing against Tsung as a player, because he was on my team in this World Cup that this game is from, actually, and he is an extraordinary player, one of the best to ever do it, just like Ojama, which is why they had such a fittingly wonderful battle. And I'm just thankful that this game in particular wound up being one, because so many games between two players wind up having stupid Pokemon stuff happen, and it just doesn't wind up being much of a game, so you don't really get to see the skills of both players involved. This one, there was Pokemon stuff involved, of course, but it didn't really mar the skill expression of both, so we still get to enjoy it later. Yeah, the thing with Tsung, though, and I'm sure he would be the first to tell you this, and there have been many others like this, but with Tsung, he famously had an extreme lucky streak. And this does not take away from how good he was as a player. Not at all. It did make playing him an infuriating experience for many, though. Because, I mean, this happens a lot with McMegan. It's like, you're having a tense game, and it's back and forth, evenly matched, two all-time great players, and then something insanely stupid happens. It's like, well, now it's not exactly fair footing anymore, which is, of course, the game of Pokemon, but it can be infuriating when you're playing someone, that good, who's unlikely to get, rattled into giving up the lead. Yeah. But the point with the Tsung effect is that he had a streak where he would get very, very lucky at the end of a game where you can't really play around it, because if you get crit on the second to last turn, well, there's not much to be done about that. And then it would be like, he would always acknowledge it. I'm not saying he was one of those guys who would be like, man, I won anyway, get the fuck out of here. He would be like, oh man, I'm sorry, that sucks. But the other little caveat he would add is like, well, I had okay odds. And I won't go too much into that, because I've also made a video about, I think it's called the perils of odds maxing or something, where people go, well, technically the odds were above zero, so, and I identified them, therefore. But it can kind of be infuriating when it's like, well, the odds were less than 10%. 10% is already, kind of sketchy. But, when it happens like that, it's like, well, I had odds because or, even if it was above 10%, it was like, well, I could have crit, or I could have parried. Either would have given me the win. Therefore, it was different. I'm not saying he was a dick about it. He was always a very nice guy, in addition to being an extraordinary player. So I'm using him simply for educational purposes. He was not some idiot who just, hacks everyone to win. Far from it. Because a player not as good as him wouldn't have won as much as he did, even with the luck he got. We see this all the time. Sometimes there's a player who just gets unbelievable luck nonstop, but they don't win as much as him. So, yeah. The point is, though, that there is this is the whole playing to your outs thing that I would like to push back on a little. Specifically, and I won't go too much into the whole sociological or player culture revolves around kind of disingenuous interpretations of the results of the game itself, or the processes of the game itself. But I've noticed this is a long time trend at this point, actually, where someone will get really outplayed for the first, 85% of the game, 90% of the game, and then they'll identify that they can still win in the late game. Because, and I'm not saying this is what Tsung did, by the way, either. It's like, oh, we just read the odds at the end. He was a great player throughout. But this is more of a general phenomenon where Tsung, I really need this to not come across as a character assassination of Tsung. I know I have, but I'm very particular about this. Anyway, so Tsung, god damn it. So a lot of players will get outplayed for the first 80% of the game, whatever the exact percentage is not really relevant. Then in the end game, the late game, whatever you want to call it, they recognize I can still win if I get these odds. Then they play for those odds, and then they get them, and then the crowd response tends to only remember the end of a game, which is this is kind of a stunning short-term memory that's also been around for a long time. Like someone will get super lucked at the beginning of a game, and then they'll get some luck to get bring it back to them like at the end, and then the crowd will be like, "Man, that was really unlucky for a person who got insane luck at the beginning of the game to bring it to that point." So it kind of applies here, I suppose. But or no, it really does. Because, or whatever. The point is that the first 90% this player will get outplayed. They'll identify that they needed, a T-Bolt para, and they'll do some fancy double switching to get that T-Bolt para. And then, you know what? Wow, that was some skillful double switching to get that T-Bolt para, in the 3 turns or whatever that they had to do it. That was a skillful win by, X. And this always kind of rubs me the wrong way, because I'm like, well, number one, where was that for the first 90% of the game when they were getting outplayed? Or even if they, didn't get if they didn't have circles run around them, they, which often is the case, they'll have circles run around them, and then, they'll get the luck at the end, and then it's like, oh, well, skillful. But even if they didn't get shown up for the first 90%, that which conveniently gets forgotten after, it's more, well, they still got outplayed. Remember, they played to their 10% outs, but they still played into a position where they got the 10% outs. And remember, I'm talking about general scenarios where there wasn't outrageous luck involved. If someone got stupid luck and then, I got the T-Bolt para I needed to bring me back, after I lost 2 Pokemon to crit KOs or whatever, that's obviously not the same thing. I'm talking about general, clean, relatively clean, whatever you want to call it, kind of stuff, where, the way the game was played until that point was, well, it's like the other player got a 90% chance of winning, or whatever it is, which is really good. So the reason I take issue with it is not just like, well, what about the player who played better for the first 90%, got themselves into that 90% chance of winning? Why is the... of course, it's good to not give up. Obviously, don't give up and, look for your odds right to the very end. Of course, that's skill in Pokemon, no matter what the situation is. But I feel like, I guess it does kind of come back to, how we look at the game. But, yeah, the whole, why is the attention going here, and especially I take issue with it because, again, I argued with this, with Earthworm about this before. He used to say once he said hacks is a figment of the imagination at one of my Smogon Tour games. I should have smacked him. I was winning the game anyway, but it was like, dude, you're lucky that. Actually, I think even if I got crit on that last turn, I couldn't have lost. So he was lucky he said it then. Otherwise, yeah. Otherwise, I would have sent Jim Cool to find him. Anyway, so let me gather my thoughts real quick. So the luck so the thing Earthworm was saying, yes, it takes skill to identify that blah blah. You need luck to. It takes skill to identify that if you Ice Punch Freeze or whatever, that's a good strategy. Yes, but when you get to that last 90% of a game, then the game has been very simplified. That's the thing. When you are in the late stages of a game, then it's like, well, you often get to situations where it's like, well, if I crit, I win, because there are many less pieces. No matter how badly you're getting routed for much of a game, just through the development of your average battle, your opponent is very rarely going to have 100% victory. Not every move is going to outspeed and OHKO, and no chance that even a crit will win or secondary effect, whatever. The exchange of attacks means that luck will happen, and very few wins are going to go without any attack counterattacks even being possible, or moves missing, whatever. No, I missed high jump kick. I think I KO'd myself without even taking damage, stuff like that. So when the game is simplified, and that's when you come alive and go, well, if I get the T-Bolt crit and double switch, then I can still win. It's like, great, but it's not just that the opponent played better in the first 90% of the game. It's also that they played better in the 90% where the game wasn't as laid out. The game was more complicated in that first 70%, if you want to be more generous. 70%, the first two-thirds, early game, mid-game, they played better. And they were significantly advantaged as a result. So, and they did so in the stages of the game which were not as simplified. When there are fewer Pokemon, it's like, well, they could only switch in, two other Pokemon. Therefore, I have these chances to use Thunderbolt or whatever. Yeah. So, to me, I'm wondering, that's another addition to, well, not just why did the, player who gets the luck at the end of the game get looked at more for that. So because the game has been simplified at that point. And, it's not even theoretical. It also often happens is that, when the game is more complicated, they get those circles run around them, and then the end game comes around. It's like, well, if I crit, I can still win. And I'm like, of course, it can be very impressive to, identify that you're still just like a Draco, I don't know, like a T-Bolt Para and like 16 double switches away. Sure, but a lot of the time, with how close, games between players of similar skill levels tend to be, it's not very impressive to say, oh, if I, crit, then I win, or if I freeze, and the thaw doesn't come, then I win, stuff like that. And it kind of goes back to that other Earthworm post, which I've also linked in the pinned comment, where the question was actually, it was in response to a game of Tisung's as well. It wasn't for a tournament, I don't think, but it was the game I mentioned in the Freeze Claws video, where he gets like 2 freezes in 3 turns or something. And he was like, well, a possible side effect of spamming ice moves is getting a freeze, and you take that into consideration when you use every single Ice Beam or Ice Punch. Yes, that's very true, but I think you can see how this can get a little out of hand, where it's like, well, I use a move with a secondary effect, and I just was spamming it, and oh look, I got the secondary effect. And it was not necessarily, whether or not it's skillful or, deserved or whatever. You can have these debates forever. But I think it can wind up being a little too easy to simply, I clicked the super effective move against the super effective Pokemon, and I got the secondary effect, which is extremely difficult / impossible to, guard against. So, something like Jirachi's Fire Punch in DPP, or even Advance, honestly, where in many cases, it's not reasonable to switch into it because it's like, well, if it burns, then you're almost totally screwed. Yeah. To oversimplify that and not delve into it, well, if you have Heatran or if you have Heal Bell and stuff like that. Yeah. So, I don't know. This is just a kind of, I think the, playing to the outs thing it's something that the average player is much more aware of. They don't just give up because the end game is gone now. But I think in our obsession with odds, then I feel like we only remember the end of a game sometimes. And the player who gets the low odds because they identified, oh, that's the only way I can win, that winds up being the center of how we view the battle, and that feels like a shame to me. I don't know. It feels like this is not the most awful of offenses, of course, but I don't know. I like the interesting aspects of Pokemon too much, and I feel like they often get sidelined in favor of Goldfish memory. I don't know. This is not to diminish anyone who has a tough end game and has to rely on a little luck. I mean, look, it's Pokemon. Everything has so much luck, it's absurd. But yeah, I think I've said basically what I want to say. So that's basically it for me. Thanks so much for watching / listening. Let me know what you think. And And yeah, I will see you in the next one.